unaware he inherited billions overnight. His wife abandoned him for a richer man. The night Daniel Okoro was thrown out of his own apartment, it wasn't the rain, he remembered. It was the laughter. Not the kind that comes from joy. The kind people use when they think someone beneath them has finally been exposed. Years later, when people would ask how a man once sleeping in a mechanic's workshop became one of the most feared business names in Africa, Daniel would always say the same thing. It started the night I was humiliated and realized the people closest to me had been living inside a lie. Because what destroyed his marriage wasn't poverty. It was a secret no one knew Daniel carried, not even Daniel himself. Stories like this don't begin with revenge. They begin with silence, with little things people ignore. A wife answering phone calls in another room, a landlord becoming strangely patient, a letter hidden in a drawer, and a father's death that never made sense. If you've ever believed struggle meant failure, this story may change how you see everything. Daniel was the kind of man people overlooked. 34, quiet, slim, always wearing faded shirts with sleeves rolled halfway. He repaired generators in a dusty workshop in Douala and smelled permanently of engine oil and metal. People called him Professor, half mocking, because he read books during lunch breaks. Economics, history, business magazines older customers threw away, while other mechanics argued football. Daniel studied market charts he barely understood. He had a habit of rubbing his thumb over old notebook edges when thinking, and another habit, he trusted too much, especially his wife Amara. That was his weakness. Amara was beautiful in the polished way poverty sometimes sharpens ambition, always dressed better than their neighborhood suggested, always speaking like she was meant for bigger places. She hated their cramped apartment, hated Daniel's modesty, hated that he refused fast money. "You think integrity pays rent?" she once snapped. Daniel only smiled. One day, patience will, she laughed so hard she nearly dropped her wine. Patience. To her, that word sounded like failure wearing perfume. Still, Daniel adored her because he remembered when she wasn't this way, when she sold fabric beside her mother and called him my future, when they ate roasted corn by the roadside and dreamed together. Before ambition became comparison, before comparison became contempt, before Victor arrived. Victor Mensa drove imported cars, owned lounges, wore watches that cost more than Daniel made in years. He moved like a man who expected rooms to bend around him, and Amara looked at him the way hungry people stare through bakery windows. Victor called Daniel brother, too warmly, too often. Daniel didn't trust him, but he never had proof, only instincts. And instincts are hard to defend in marriage, especially when your wife says you're insecure because he has what you don't. That sentence cut deeper than she knew, because Daniel carried an old wound. His father had died when he was 17, a dock worker, or so Daniel believed. Quiet man, disciplined, never spoke about family. Before dying, his father left one sentence: "Some doors open only when betrayal forces you to knock." Daniel never understood it, just strange words from a dying man, or so he thought, until the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, rainy, folded in cream paper, no stamp, hand-delivered. The handwriting was old-fashioned. Inside, Mr. Daniel Okoro, Matters regarding your late father require your immediate attention. Do not ignore this. No signature. Only an address in Lagos. Daniel stared at it for hours. Something ancient stirred in him. That night, he showed Amara. She barely looked up from her phone. Scam. Maybe, then throw it away. But she asked one strange question. Did your father ever mention property? Daniel frowned. No. She grew thoughtful. Too thoughtful. And later, while pretending asleep, Daniel watched her secretly photograph the letter. He said nothing, but something cold moved through him. Questions began, and questions have a way of waking sleeping truths. 3 weeks later came the humiliation. Public, precise, planned. It was Victor's birthday. Private rooftop party, rich guests, music, glass lights, people whose shoes alone could feed neighborhoods. Daniel hated going. Amara insisted. You embarrassed me enough hiding in that workshop. At the party, Daniel stood awkwardly with juice while men discussed imports and oil contracts. Then Victor raised a toast, spoke warmly, too warmly, to friendship, he said, then smiled. Some men teach us what not to become. Laughter. Daniel stiffened. Victor continued, like dreaming big while fixing generators. More laughter. Amara laughed too. Laughed. Daniel looked at her, really looked, and something inside him cracked. Victor leaned closer. Tell them your business plans, Professor. The room watched. Daniel's silence fed their amusement. Then Amara, half-drunk, said it. Business plans? Daniel can't even pay rent. Explosion of laughter. Some covered mouths. Some didn't bother. Daniel set down his glass, walked away. No scene, no shouting. Just dignity, held together by thread. But humiliation doesn't end when you leave a room. Sometimes it follows home and waits. When they returned, Amara was different, almost relieved, as if some performance had reached final act. She opened the door, turned, pointed. Leave. Daniel blinked. What? I'm done pretending. She had packed a small bag. His clothes, thrown together. Daniel stared, then saw Victor inside, sitting in his home, drinking, like he belonged there. The room tilted. Daniel whispered, What is this? Amara folded her arms. Reality. Victor smirked. You're a decent man, Daniel, but she needs more. Daniel looked from one to the other, unable to process. 10 years, reduced to spectators mocking his eviction. Then Amara said words that would haunt her later. You are too small for the life I want. Small, not poor. Small. She wanted that wound to stay. Daniel picked his bag, walked out. No begging, no shouting. Rain swallowed him, and under a mechanic shop awning that night, he opened his father's old wallet for no reason. Maybe pain makes us reach backward. Inside, hidden beneath cracked leather lining, something he'd never seen. A tiny brass key and folded paper. His father's handwriting. If this reaches you, it means they pushed too far. Go to Lagos. Ask for Adderall. Trust no one first, especially those suddenly interested in your name. Daniel read it again, then again. Rain pounding roof, heart racing. Who was suddenly interested in his name? Then he remembered. The letter. Amara. Photographing it. Victor. Questions about property. A chill moved through him. What if this wasn't random? What if his marriage wasn't simply collapsing, but being steered? That thought should have sounded paranoid. Instead, It felt logical and terrifying. He traveled to Lagos 3 days later with borrowed money. Didn't tell anyone, not even his closest friend Musa. The address led to an old law office, colonial building, dust, mahogany shelves, time trapped in wood. Inside sat a man in white traditional attire, 70 perhaps, sharp eyes. He looked up once, then stood slowly. Emotion crossed his face. "God help me," he whispered. "You have his face." Daniel froze. "Who?" The old man extended trembling hands. "Your father, Adewale." The name in the note. Daniel sat, breathing hard, and heard words that split his life in two. "Your father was not a dock worker." Silence. "Then he was heir to Okoro Holdings." Daniel laughed, because sometimes truth sounds absurd before it sounds real. "What?" Adewale slid documents across table. "Shipping, energy, mining, assets, billions." Daniel pushed papers back. "No." "Yes." "Why hide it?" "Because your father's brothers tried to kill him over inheritance." Daniel went cold. No sound, only pulse. Adewale continued. "He disappeared, chose ordinary life to protect you." Daniel's hands shook. "This is impossible." "Your father died last year, yes?" Daniel nodded. Adewale's face darkened. "He did not die naturally." The room seemed to narrow. Meaning changed shape. Past changed shape. Everything changed. Then came the second blow. The inheritance had matured through trust structures and by legal succession. Daniel was sole controlling heir. Value? 82 billion. Daniel nearly stood, walked, ran, anything. This was madness. Yet, documents, seals, history, photographs. His father in suits beside presidents. Ports, ships, things impossible to fake. His whole life built on concealment. Then Adewale said, "There is urgency." "Why?" "Because others know." "Who?" A pause. Then, "People inside your family." And lower, "Possibly a wife." Ice. Daniel remembered her questions. Victor. The mockery. The timing. Suddenly, betrayal had architecture. Not chaos. Design. But before Daniel could speak, Adewale placed one final file before him, marked confidential. Inside was an investigation note. Daniel read, stopped breathing. Victor Mensa, connected through shell companies to a subsidiary quietly attempting acquisition of Okoro assets. Victor, not random, not lover, appearing by chance. Inserted. Daniel looked up slowly. "What are you saying?" Adewale's eyes held sorrow. "I'm saying your humiliation may have been a strategy." Every sound vanished, as if the world itself paused. Had Amara known? Was she manipulated? Complicit? Both? Daniel couldn't tell, which made it worse, because betrayal from greed hurts. Betrayal mixed with uncertainty poisons. Adewale leaned in. "If you accept this inheritance, then they will come." For what? For control. Daniel looked at his grease-stained hands. Hands that repaired broken machines. Now told they could command empires. It felt ridiculous. And yet something old awakened. His father's silence. His reading habits. His instincts. Maybe preparation had been happening invisibly all along. Then Adewale said something Daniel never forgot. Some men inherit wealth. Others inherit unfinished wars. Daniel returned to Douala changed. Not rich yet. Not triumphant. Changed. Quiet in a new way. Dangerously observant. He told no one, not even Amara, especially not Amara. Instead, he watched, and what he saw chilled him. Victor entering apartment while Daniel was supposedly at work. Amara taking mysterious calls. Documents searched. Drawers disturbed. One evening, he returned unexpectedly. Heard Victor's voice inside. If he signs before discovery, we own everything. Daniel stood outside door, heart pounding. Then Amara answered, voice trembling. What if Daniel finds out? Victor laughed. He's too ordinary to suspect. Something hardened in Daniel forever. Not heartbreak. Clarity. He left silently, but that night he made first decision of his new life. He would pretend ignorance, let predators believe prey was asleep, and learn who hunted him. Strategy began, but so did danger, because secrets attract movement. And someone had noticed Daniel had visited Lagos 2 nights later, returning from workshop. A black SUV followed him, slowly, then disappeared. Next morning, Musa whispered, 2 men came asking about you. Daniel smiled faintly. Storm approaching, faster than expected. Then came another shock. Adewale called. Voice urgent. Do not go home tonight. Daniel froze. Why? Silence. Then, there has been a death. What? One sentence. Heavy as iron. Someone murdered the trustee handling your inheritance. Daniel's blood turned cold. Murder. This was no family dispute. This was war. And before Daniel could respond, Adewale added, there is one more thing you must know about your wife. Line crackled. Voices. Then shouting. Then the call cut. Dead. Daniel called back. No answer. Again. Nothing. His hands shook. Rain started. Of course rain. As if fate preferred dramatic timing. Then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A photo. Amara. Sitting beside Victor. Across table with 2 unfamiliar older men. One face circled in red. Message below. He is your uncle. He knows you're alive. Run! Daniel stared at screen. Breath gone. Uncle? Alive? Watching? How deep was this? Then, footsteps behind him in alley. Daniel turned. 3 men approaching. Slow. Deliberate. One smiled. Mr. Okoro. Daniel stepped back. How do you know me? The man's grin widened. We've been looking for the rightful heir. Rain poured harder, and Daniel realized the inheritance had found him, but not in the way he imagined. As one man reached into his coat, Daniel understood something terrifying. The people who stole his marriage might be the least dangerous enemies he had. And the truth about Amara, whatever Adewale was about to reveal, remained unfinished, hidden, waiting, just as the first man whispered, Come with us quietly. Daniel saw something in the shadows behind them move, watching, not helping, watching. And he knew someone else had entered the game, someone neither side expected. Rain ran through the alley like spilled ink. The man's hand remained inside his coat. Daniel's instincts screamed before thought could form. Run! But fear can freeze ordinary men. What changes lives is what happens after freezing. Daniel did something even he didn't expect. He spoke, calm. What does my uncle want? The man paused. Small hesitation. Enough. Because hesitation reveals uncertainty. And Daniel suddenly understood. They didn't know how much he knew. That was power. Very small, but power. Then from the shadows came another voice. Leave him. All 4 men turned. An old motorcycle rolled into the alley. Headlight-cutting rain, rider in hooded poncho, could barely be seen. Yet the three men stepped back, not from fear, recognition. One muttered something Daniel couldn't hear. Then, unbelievably, they left, just turned and disappeared into rain. Daniel stared. The rider removed hood, a woman in her 50s, hard eyes, scar near jaw. Get on. Daniel didn't move. Now, unless you want to die in an alley, he got on. Sometimes survival begins by obeying mysteries. Her name was Zainab, former security chief for Daniel's father, another hidden fragment of a life he never knew. She took him to an old warehouse near the port. Generators hummed, maps on walls, files stacked. It looked less like refuge, more like war room. Zainab poured tea as if none of this were unusual, then said, "Your father prepared for this." Daniel almost laughed. "Prepared for being hunted?" "For you returning." She studied him. "You think your father hid because he was afraid." Pause. "He disappeared because he was fighting men who build kingdoms by stealing blood." Daniel sat heavily, everything widening. Then came the truth Adewale never finished. "Your wife," Zainab said, "was not originally part of their plan." Daniel looked up sharply. "What?" "She was targeted. That hit differently. Not betrayal erased. Betrayal complicated. Victor had pursued Amara years earlier through business opportunities. Promises, luxury, debt relief for her struggling family. Slow manipulation. At first she resisted. Later, she participated. Then became trapped, used. Daniel felt anger, and something worse, grief, because evil is easier when simple, harder when mixed with weakness. "Did she love me at all?" he asked quietly. Zainab answered without softness. "Yes." "Then why?" "Because some people don't betray for hatred." She leaned in. "They betray because fear and ambition speak louder than conscience." That line lodged deep, not excuse, insight. And insight is heavier than revenge. For weeks, Daniel disappeared publicly. Rumors spread he had fled. Victor relaxed. That was useful, because Daniel was learning. Night after night, Zainab and surviving advisors trained him. Corporate warfare, asset structures, family alliances, how enemies use legal traps instead of bullets, how smiling men destroy nations through signatures. Daniel absorbed it with frightening speed. The mechanic who studied old magazines now read acquisition reports till dawn. Patterns emerged. His uncle, Gideon Okoro, the circled face from photo, had been siphoning billions for years. If Daniel claimed control, Gideon lost everything. This was not inheritance dispute. It was regime change, and Daniel formed a strategy. Not emotional revenge, precision. Never attack where ego wants, Zainab said. Attack where structure breaks. So Daniel did. Quietly, he began reclaiming dormant shares through proxies, freezing offshore routes, turning Gideon's allies against one another, using their greed as weapon, like fixing engines. Understand where pressure leaks, then let the machine collapse itself. It was brilliant, but dangerous, and still one question haunted him. Amara, was she enemy? Victim? Both? Fate answered sooner than expected. She came to the warehouse, alone, at night. Daniel almost didn't recognize her. No glamour, no arrogance, only exhaustion. She looked smaller, human. She whispered, "They'll kill you." Daniel stared. You came to warn me." Tears welled. First genuine tears he'd seen from her in years. "I made terrible choices." Silence. Then, "Victor used my brother's debts, threatened prison." Daniel said nothing, because pain was too layered for quick response. She stepped closer. "I thought I was choosing survival." Daniel finally spoke. "You laughed when they humiliated me. That landed like blade." She broke. "I hate myself for that. Some wounds do not heal in dramatic reunions. They sit between people, breathing." She gave him a flash drive. "Victor and Gideon meet tomorrow," then looked at him with devastating honesty. "I don't expect forgiveness." And perhaps that made Daniel believe her more, because guilt seeking no reward sounds different. As she left, she turned. "You were never small, Daniel." The same word, returned, transformed, and somehow that hurt more than insult ever had. The meeting was aboard a private yacht. Gideon, Victor, foreign investors, illegal transfers, everything recorded. Daniel could have leaked it anonymously, destroyed them quietly, but justice hidden felt incomplete. He wanted revelation, meaning, so he did something no one expected. He walked into Gideon's annual shareholder summit. Live, global press, board members, security froze, gasps, because dead heirs aren't supposed to enter through front doors. Daniel took podium, simple suit, mechanic's posture still there, only sharpened. Gideon smiled coldly, trying control. Who allowed this disruption? Daniel answered into microphone. "Your nephew." Silence detonated. Then Daniel began, not shouting. Evidence, transfers, fraud, murders tied through contracts, screens lit with documents, faces drained. Victor lunged toward exit. Arrest teams waiting. Zainab had arranged that. Gideon whispered venomously, "You think blood makes you worthy?" Daniel leaned close enough. Only he heard. "No." He straightened. "Character does." Security took Gideon away. An empire shifted in one afternoon, not because of inherited billions, because a man once mocked as ordinary, learned. Intelligence can be quieter than arrogance, and deadlier. News called it historic. Markets called it shocking. Daniel called it unfinished. Because victory without inner reckoning feels hollow. Weeks later, he met Amara one final time. Small cafe, no luxury, just two people among ruins. She expected anger. Instead, Daniel asked, "Were you ever happy with me?" She cried before answering. "Yes." "Then why chase more?" She smiled sadly. "I mistook glitter for safety." There was the lesson. Simple, ancient, human. Daniel pushed envelope toward her. Funds for her family's debts. She stared. After all this, kindness? Why? She whispered. Daniel's answer would become quoted years later. "Because if betrayal turns me cruel," he said, "then betrayal still owns me." She wept openly. They parted, not reconciled, but understood. And sometimes understanding is a higher form of closure. Daniel rebuilt Okoro Holdings differently. Workers became shareholders. Ports funded schools. Profits backed small entrepreneurs. People called it idealistic. He called it memory. He remembered oil on his hands, mockery, hunger. He refused to become polished predator in expensive suits, and that made him dangerous in a new way, because power with memory is hard to corrupt. One day a young reporter asked, "How did a mechanic become this?" Daniel smiled. "By discovering wealth wasn't what saved me. What did?" He answered, "Humiliation." The reporter blinked. Daniel continued, "It forced me to meet myself, because the truth was, being abandoned had not destroyed him. It exposed who had been sleeping." There was irony, too. Victor once measured men by cars. He now faced decades in prison. Gideon spent his last years watching the empire he stole, transformed by the heir he dismissed. And Daniel, the small man, became larger than inheritance. That was justice, not revenge. Transformation. Years later, Daniel kept the brass key from his father, framed beside one sentence: "Some doors open only when betrayal forces you to knock." Now he understood. His father hadn't left a warning. He left a map, because sometimes loss is disguised initiation. Sometimes being cast out is how destiny makes room. And sometimes the people who abandon you for better are really escorting you toward what was always yours. That was the deeper inheritance. Not billions, identity. One evening, Daniel stood overlooking ships and sunset, wind carrying salt, thinking of father, of Amara, of rain, of Alice, of laughter that once wounded him. And he said quietly to no one, "They thought they were humiliating a mechanic." He smiled. "They were awakening an empire. If this story makes anything clear, it is this: betrayal doesn't always arrive to ruin you. Sometimes it arrives to reveal what comfort kept hidden. Sometimes the hand that pushes you away pushes you toward your true name. And sometimes the people who call you ordinary are standing in front of a future they cannot recognize. Because real power often looks small before it's seasoned. Remember that. If this story made you think differently, let me know.